Hello, my name is Wendy Myers. Welcome to the Myers Detox Podcast. You can check me out at myersdetox.com, where we have hundreds of articles and hundreds of podcasts about detoxification. And on this podcast, we talk about everything related to heavy metal toxicity, chemicals, what these things do to our body, the health issues they cause, how to detox, some latest detox protocols. But today, we're going to be talking about toxins that cause infertility. We'll be talking about why IVF, or in vitro fertilization, is the last step to address infertility. And we have our guest, Sarah Clark, on the show. This is such a good show because infertility is on the rise. 1 in 5 couples in the UK have issues with fertility. 1 in 6 people in Canada, 1 in 8 people in the US. I mean, this is shocking. A lot of people are having trouble making babies and conceiving children. And one of the main reasons are toxins that are interfering in our hormones, causing low hormone production. And we're going to explore all that and more on the show today. We'll be talking about the truth about today's skyrocketing infertility rates, the top 5 things you need to do before considering IVF and why it's the last step you should be thinking about, the top toxins that interfere in infertility or interfere in conception, the latest research on IVF safety, and do's and don'ts of in vitro fertilization. So I know you guys tuning into this show are concerned about toxins, concerned about the levels of toxins that you have. So I created a quiz called the Heavy Metals Quiz, and you can go check it out at heavymetalsquiz.com. And after taking that quiz, you get your results. And based on your results, you get a free video series that tells you, why you have these levels of toxins in your body and what is the next step, what you need to do to detox them from your body. And so check out that totally free video series after you take the quiz at heavymetalsquiz.com. So today on the show, we have Sarah Clark. When she was 28 years old, she received a diagnosis of premature ovarian failure. And she accepted the diagnosis and had both her children through in vitro fertilization. Years later, she realized the root cause of her infertility was actually food sensitivity and a gut infection. She is a certified life coach with accreditation from the International Coaches Federation and a health coach with training from the Institute for Integrative Nutrition. And she's the author of Fabulously Fertile, Supercharge Your Fertility Naturally, and her fertility coaching program, which includes functional lab testing, supports couples to make diet and lifestyle changes that dramatically improve the chances of a healthy pregnancy and baby. And on her Get Pregnant Naturally podcast, she shares that with functional medicine and natural fertility solutions that we can eventually reverse infertility. You can check that out on iTunes and Spotify. And you can learn more about Sarah Clark and her work with couples at fabfertile.com. Sarah, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Wendy.
So why don't you tell us your story and how you became a fertility coach?
Yeah, so I always joked I was having menopausal hot flashes in my early 20s. I remember being in HR at the time, like fanning my face and kind of joking about that. And it turns out that I was. So I had irregular periods, and by irregular, I was getting my period a couple times a year. I had this weird fungal rash on my chest. I had some yeast infections. And then all of a sudden, I started getting acne in my early 20s. And before that, I had great skin. So I had those weird health issues going on. So the first line of defense is I went on the birth control pill, and which was a Band-Aid approach and really didn't do anything to address the underlying issues of what was going on. And the acne didn't go away. Obviously, the cycle's regulated. So I had this life plan of getting married at 25 and then having my kids at 28. So I got married at 25. Then at 28 decided to go off the pill. When I went off the pill, my periods were still irregular. The acne was still there, and the yeast infections and the rash. And then so I went to my OBGYN, and I was told I had premature ovarian failure, which is a loss of function of the ovaries. before the age of 40 and told my only way I'd ever have children is by using donor eggs. I remember her like grabbing the IVF brochure and saying off to the fertility clinic you go. And I really was in shock. I had no idea those other health issues were connected to my infertility at the time. And so I went to the fertility clinic, went on a list for a donor egg, and we were lucky enough on the first fresh transfer to have our daughter, and our daughter just turned 18. So this is 18 years ago. When you said donor egg, people are like, I don't even know what the heck that is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now you've got like embryo donation and embryo adoption. And because of all people going through it through IVF, there's all these embryos that are available. I had someone on my podcast who actually, there was a little embryo that was there for 13 years, and she just had her child, and the child is 2 years old, and the natural siblings are 13 years old. So it's kind of some cool science things going on. So so I had my daughter, and then a year after that, I wanted to have my kids close together. So I went. So we had 2 embryos left over. Went back into the clinic and was super stressed. Really wanted to have my kids close together, and those didn't work. Went on another list for another donor, another donor, and then that one did work. So we were lucky enough to have our son. So he's 15, so 3 years apart. And then after I had my daughter, my health really took a nosedive. So I remember having 9 colds in 1 year. Every cold went to a sinus infection. I thought it was a great idea to take antibiotics for every cold. I had chronic yeast infections. I had chronic bladder infections, became allergic to all the antibiotics. I was peeing blood. I had hives from the antibiotics. I had vertigo, toenail infections. My health, my immune system was really compromised, although I was still functioning and still doing my thing. And then I decided to take, I was still in HR at the time, wanted to bring life coaching into the corporate environment, took a coaching course, and that's where I discovered I really wanted to get into health and wellness. Took a health coaching course, and then that's where I discovered I had these food sensitivities. So for me, at the time, I discovered I was intolerant to dairy and gluten. So I took those out of my diet, and lo and behold, the bladder, the sinus, the yeast infections started to disappear. And then a few years after that, and then I discovered I had gut infections with H. pylori and streptococcus and fungal infections. And then also that do and go kind of busy lifestyle. So saying yes to everything instead of setting boundaries. And so I didn't discover any of this until I was 40. I was fully in menopause. So for me, is really kind of get the message out. There's things we can do instead of going straight to the fertility clinic. And I didn't even get a second opinion. I'm like, okay, that's what it is. And now looking back on all the things that were going on in my health, and for me, I had to, it came to a reckoning years later. So we're helping people now instead of years later having to deal with health issue.
Yeah. And I think that is so important when you have a medical doctor tell you something that's really, very serious or life-changing, or you need this surgery, or you can't have children anymore. I would never take that at face value. I would always go get a second opinion.
Yeah.
Why? What's the underlying root cause? What's going on here? Dr. Google, help me. I would not take that at face value. I think so many people are, prone to, just completely trusting our medical professionals and just taking the word at face value, and that's the last word. And that's just one person's opinion, when they have every single person has a limited knowledge set. So you can't assume they know everything about fertility or what have you, their chosen profession.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so it's interesting why didn't I get a second opinion? And then going back then, there was those chat forums where I went in, and for POF, it's basically, you're just making sure you don't get osteoporosis, heart disease, you're going on HRT. I went on the pill for 10 years and then HRT. So just followed this very medical way of doing it. And with POF, it's like, sorry, you have POF. There's a 5% chance that you'll ever have your own children. It's game over. Donor eggs for you. And I actually thought I was one of the fortunate ones. I didn't have to go through IVF and all. Like, I went through IVF. I didn't have to go through trying to get my eggs to work and, years of failed cycles. I thought I had it easier. Now with donor eggs, there's only a 50% chance of it working. So luckily I was one of the fortunate ones. I see a lot of people that have, going the donor egg route, and that's still not working.
Yeah. And so infertility is a growing problem. Can you give us some statistics on, the numbers or percentages of people and couples having fertility issues? Because the stuff that I've read, it's really, really frightening.
Yeah, so it's 1 in 6 in Canada that are struggling with infertility, 1 in 8 in the US, 1 in 5 in the UK. And it's really, to me, before it was 60-40%, 60% was female factor infertility, 40% was male factor infertility. Now it's showing studies more 50-50. And a lot of times, most people that come to me, it's women that are dealing with infertility, and they're the ones making all the changes and all these things, and the male partner may not even know what they can do to improve their health. And for an IVF, it takes an average of 3 cycles at a cost of $60,000 for IVF. So people think, because usually you go to the fertility clinic, you go to your OBGYN, and like me, you're referred to the fertility clinic, and then off you go down that road of IUIs and IVFs. And people come to me afterwards where they've had all the failed cycles and it hasn't worked. So it's kind of that's a huge investment of like $60,000 at 3 cycles for it to work. When, wait a minute, there's other things we can do to maximize your chances. And my thing is, like, basically the fertility clinics are there, but to me it's the last step. Like, yes. Why do we feel that's the first step?
Yeah. And so let's talk about first a little bit about what is causing all the fertility issues that people are experiencing today.
Yeah, so my take on that, we're in the middle of a food experiment. Our food is sprayed with glyphosate, which is a herbicide linked to infertility and a whole host of other diseases. So toxin, that we're all eating, what you place on your fork every day does matter. And then also our busy stress lifestyle. So most people that I coach are busy professionals. And I was listening to a podcast with Dr. Christiane Northrup, and she was saying the higher up the degrees you have, your master's, your PhD, the higher degrees you have, the more likely that you could struggle with infertility, because you're just like this go-getter type A. And a lot of people that come to me, they're like, I've done everything, everything in my life, it's always worked because I'm an achiever and a go-getter. And now you're throwing everything into this, and it's not.
Well, isn't that a protective mechanism? Like, say, when you're stressed, the body will prevent an egg release because it's, feeling there's all this stress, and that may not be a safe environment for a woman to be pregnant in that situation. When, a million years ago, it was survival. If the tribe was under stress, if a woman was pregnant, it could kill her if they were moving a lot or whatever their stress was. So it's a protective mechanism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the body wants to survive. It doesn't want to procreate. So and we're just pushing it. So obviously looking at like functional testing, but then the mental emotional side of that is equally as important.
Yes. Yeah. And so any other contributors to our epidemic of infertility?
It's interesting. I interviewed Dr. Ben Lynch, and he was talking about epigenetics, obviously, and talking about infertility being passed on. So you've got a diagnosis of infertility, and then you go to the fertility clinic because you haven't got to the underlying reason of why, and then that potentially being passed on to your children. So I thought that was just like really scary, because it's interesting with the clinics. So back in 1985, there was 40 clinics in the US. And now in 2015, there's 500. This is like big business, like a multi-billion, trillion-dollar business with big pharma in there, with $900 million a year spent on like pharmaceuticals for, like, you see little things on Instagram, a little baby with all the needles and a heart around the baby, all the medication that it took to conceive that little child.
Yeah.
Which to me, the fertility clinics are there to help you, but really it was designed initially for people that were having issues with their tubes, like tubal disease. But now we've got people going in there with unexplained and PCOS and like all these different diagnoses. And we don't look at the diagnosis, we look at the whole body. But it's like, oh, you've got this diagnosis, here's your label, oh, that's what it is, off you go. And meanwhile, but why are all these other things that are off? There's lots of, we see regularly dysregulated thyroid, food sensitivities, gut infections, hormonal imbalance, like a whole host of things, blood sugar imbalance, reasons why, especially if we're unexplained. There are people coming in with undiagnosed autoimmune disease. So it's not unexplained.
Yes. Yeah. And so you're not going to get information like this at your typical medical doctor's office. That's why we're doing what we're doing, to give people answers that they're seeking when they're trying to conceive and it's not working out. So, when is the right time to do IVF, to do in vitro fertilization? What kind of, things do people need to try first before they go that route?
And this is very personal. Obviously, if you're listening to this podcast, you're open to more of a functional side of things and looking at things more naturally. So I would say if you're just diagnosed, to go organic. If that's too cost prohibitive, at least the dirty dozen, making sure that you're not eating those foods that are the most highly sprayed. Looking at with the toxin kind of things, so looking at your water, you want to make sure you're drinking enough water, but you want to make sure that water is filtered. At a minimum, a Brita, which is even not the best. If you can afford a Berkey, great. But making sure it's filtered and you're not drinking the water out of a plastic water bottle, which then the plastics can leach into that and impact both male and female fertility. And water is essential for cervical mucus, so for the sperm to get to the egg. So you want to make sure that you're hydrated. So eating organic food, looking at water, and then also you can consider in the very beginning, consider an elimination diet. So we have people start off by taking out the top allergens, which are dairy, gluten, soy, corn, peanuts, and eggs. Take those out for 10 days and then systematically reintroduce them back in. So and then we recommend that for both partners. So that's if you're just diagnosed. Now, if you've been through multiple failed IUIs or IVFs, it hasn't worked, and then we're going to say, okay, let's do the elimination diet, we're going to do all this stuff. It could be too overwhelming. So that piece, we would have you start with mindset. So because going through that, even though you may have insurance, I work with people that have insurance for 5 or 6 rounds of IVF, and they keep going and going and going, and it doesn't work. But the heartbreak and the stress associated with going through 5 or 6 cycles is immense.
It's
to be able to, yeah, absolutely. So to deal with the trauma, to dig into to mindset, to really be able to slow down, focus on self-care, look at sleep, like those foundational pieces. So depending on where you are, if you've had one failed IVF and one failed IUI, then potentially you could be ready to do some functional testing, which we do, as well as the elimination diet, and then start making those foundational diet and lifestyle changes.
And what role do gut infections play in suppressing one's ability to conceive?
We see this, I'd say the majority of people that we work with, there is something going on in the gut, be it we see H. pylori being passed back and forth to couples, not even having any of those GERD, like those acid reflux, not even having those symptoms. That was me actually at H. pylori. I had none of those standard symptoms. And we see this a lot with couples passing it back and forth with saliva. Parasites, multiple parasites, people with low anti-Müllerian hormone being told, donor eggs are for you, that your success, that the quality of your eggs is horrible. Sorry, that the quantity of your eggs is very low, and you won't be able to conceive. And we see people with multiple parasites, bacterial infections, fungal infections. You clear that up, and then they can get pregnant naturally. So the gut is huge, and so we always do the GI map test to look to see what's going on in the gut, and then develop a low and slow protocol to allow the gut to heal.
Yeah, it makes sense, because that natural killer T cells have to be low in order for a fetus to grow. And if you have all these infections and you have a high natural killer T cell count, because it's having the immune system's on overdrive, dealing with all the infections, your body's considering you too much under stress to conceive.
Yeah, I had a friend who, so she had 9 years of infertility, and she had high natural killer cells, and went on an AIP diet, and like years later, she trying to figure this whole thing out. Went through a number of IVFs that all failed, and then she went to the AIP diet and was able to get pregnant naturally.
Fantastic.
Mhm.
Fantastic. Yeah. And it's not just women that are at fault here. It's not that our bodies are failing us. I mean, sometimes the infertility is due to men also. We had a great podcast with Dr. Eva Keen talking about sperm quality, how to improve sperm quality as well, because, your mate has a role in this as well. What can be done for men?
Yeah, absolutely. So we typically will deal with female factor infertility, and even if the man's like, "Oh, my sperm is fine," there's always things we can do to improve his preconception health. So we do a blood chemistry review. It's not to diagnose, it's to educate, to see what has been missed on his blood chem. Be it, is there any thyroid issues that have been missed? Again, we see those infections being passed back and forth with partners, so that's something to look at. And then also a lot with if the sperm is fine, everything's good for him. In the beginning, I was just coaching women and found that I was missing the other link. So it's this is a couple that's having a baby. So to have the two of them together, sometimes they haven't even talked about some of the things that we're talking about, and it's just sort of giving voice to some of these emotions. A lot of times, the male partner feels he has to be strong, or that he can't really show how he's feeling, and he's equally as hurting. He wants to have his child and expand his family. So to have the two of them together can be really helpful for that mental emotional side of things. But yeah, for sperm, it's looking at EMFs, to not to have the cell phone in the pocket, to minimize plastics, look at elimination diet. We have both partners do the elimination diet, because again, most people that come to us say they don't have a food sensitivity, but I'd say almost everyone that comes to us has a food sensitivity.
Yeah, people
Yeah.
don't realize it. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and then, at least for men, their sperm regenerates every 72 days. So if
That's
they
right.
just clean up their act for
Yeah.
72 days, they've got some brand new sperm
Mm-hmm.
that's good to go. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
no drinking, smoking, partying,
Yeah.
fast
So
food
yeah,
for
exactly.
72 days. So yeah, so let's talk about toxins.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like toxins are playing a massive role in interfering in people's hormones, interfering in just all the different metabolic processes that happen that lead to conception. So, why is it important to look at toxins and eliminate them prior to conceiving?
Yeah, so these are the stressors. So the stressors we have are either a food sensitivity, a gut infection, environmental toxins, mental emotional stress, or structural stress. So the environmental side of things, being able to, there's lots of studies linking it back to endocrine issues. So linked to infertility. So looking at plastics, making sure you switch over to a glass water bottle or a stainless steel water bottle. If you are microwaving, first of all, it's not the best idea to microwave, but if you are microwaving, do not microwave in plastic, use glass. And then also looking at your personal care. So going to the Skin Deep database, looking at your current personal care. It's not about freaking out and throwing everything in the garbage. It's wait, as each thing then finishes, you will then switch to a more non-toxic options, which is really, really key for fertility. You're slathering all these lotions and potions on your body, which is then impacting your endocrine system for both male and female. So we have people switch those out, and there is a tendency for people to kind of get a little bit like overwrought about that, because it's like, oh wait, this isn't really, you got to throw it all out. So that is a stress in itself. So doing that gradually is key. Same with the cleaning products, making sure you're swapping out your cleaning products again when they switch out. And then also looking at feminine hygiene. So a lot of times women are, in your most delicate area in your vagina, you are placing tampons or pads that are been sprayed with glyphosate linked to, infertility. So switching out to a Diva cup or an organic pad or tampon, or a reusable one too, is a good option. So that's one that most people haven't done, actually, the feminine hygiene. When I speak to them, they may have done some of the personal care or the cleaning chemicals, but the feminine hygiene, they're like, oh my goodness, I haven't done that.
Yes, yeah, and also if it's not organic cotton, you mentioned sprayed with glyphosate, but then it's also dyed, it's also bleached, I mean,
Yeah.
and so it's going to have dioxins, and there's so many different other pesticides also that can be used in non-organic cotton. So you don't want any of that anywhere near your vajayjay.
Oh,
For sure.
thank you.
Yeah. And then also like personal lubricants. A lot of times these are, toxic as well, petroleum-based ingredients, fragrances, douches, other kind of things like Refresh. That's full of parabens, or which are hormone disruptors. A lot of women will use like that Refresh pH balance stuff to try to balance out their vaginal flora, but that has parabens in it, which are, like I said, endocrine disruptors. So there's just a lot of different things you have to evaluate. Everything that's going on in your body, you have to kind of look at that and be a label detective and figure out if that's right for you or not. Also, cadmium plays a huge role in infertility as well, because cadmium will increase the number of natural killer T cells. And cadmium is a very, very toxic metal. It's more toxic than all of the other heavy metals combined. So it's really a good thing for people to identify if they have cadmium, especially if they've had recurrent miscarriages. Cadmium could play a role in that. Let's talk about IVF. So if someone's doing all of these things, the food sensitivities and doing some testing and, cleaning up their diet and water intake, at what point, if they're still not successful, should they consider IVF?
Yeah, so to me, it's to take a minimum. So it takes 90 days for the egg to renew itself. The life cycle of the sperm, as you say, is 70 to 80 days. So really, in a short period of time, you can make major changes to your health. So a minimum of 3 months. We say 6 months, because basically you've got to be able to give yourself time to make some of these changes. And we use functional lab testing like food sensitivity, hormone, stool, and hair tissue mineral analysis to then develop a customized protocol. Because IVF has developed for people with tubal issues, I think it's kind of, the problem is most people come to me if they're 28 or 38, everyone's past the point when they want to expand their family. So fighting them off from going to IVF is a little bit of a issue as well, because people are like, oh my goodness, the clock is running out of time. I need to do this now. I can't take 6 months. It's too much. But like we're explaining about, it's important for your health, for a healthy pregnancy, and also for your children, for your postpartum health. So for me, I didn't fix any of this stuff. I didn't discover it till I was 40, like I was talking about. So both my kids have food sensitivities, and my postpartum health, I didn't really think I had an issue with it. But looking back now, I've since heard about postpartum rage. So mine was like, I was not crying. I was just freaking ticked off, like just cranky and irritable. So I didn't have the smoothest postpartum period. So to me, like that rushing towards the fertility clinic, it's there. I totally get it, because we see people, like if you're in your early 40s and you're like, wait a minute. So to me, at a minimum of 6 months, like work on whatever's happening in there, be it, as we talked about, the food sensitivities, the gut infections, environmental toxins, mental emotional stress, work on that. And then if you're not pregnant naturally, then you can go off and you'll either get pregnant naturally or increase your chances of success at the clinic, because the clinic only has a success rate. An average IVF is a success of 30%, and IUI is 10%, and donor eggs are 50%. So it's an extremely expensive option. And then we still don't know the impact of those drugs on the woman and on the children. Like there's studies talking about that really, is some of the studies around women that have gone through IVF. Are their children at a higher risk of some cancers? Are women themselves at a higher risk of some cancers? So I can talk a little bit about those studies if you like.
Why don't we talk about that for sure?
Yeah, so there's the Canadian Medical Association Journal. So women who undergo IVF, there's a slightly higher risk of developing severe complications than women who become pregnant naturally. Women with IVF have an increased risk of ovarian hyperstimulation or preterm delivery and preeclampsia associated with cardiovascular disease later in life. And then there's some small studies in the 1990s and mid-2000s suggested that women who underwent IVF might be more likely than the general population to be diagnosed with ovarian cancer, breast cancer, and uterine cancer. but larger studies investigating this issue don't show the same link. And then there's one from Denmark published in 2009 that looked at more than 50,000 Danish women who took fertility drugs and found no increased risk of ovarian cancer. So another one published in 2011 looked at over 24,000 Swedish women and found that IVF actually decreased the chances of those three common cancers. So there's conflicting studies in there. To me, like, it's all preliminary. So we don't really know the impact of putting all these drugs into your body. And then for children, the American Journal of Human Genetics found that babies born to moms using IVF with fertility drugs had a higher incidence of retinoblastoma and neuroblastoma cancers. And then also, this is what I saw personally. So the Journal of American College of Cardiology found that children born to women with IVF had a higher incidence of food sensitivities, which I saw. Both my kids have food sensitivities, allergies. Yes, and like both my daughter had ear infections and tubes in her ears, eczema. Yes, so I can see that personally from going through that. And I have a friend who actually, she works with children with autism. She sees a higher percentage of women that have gone through IVF, their children have autism. Now these are, I think it's not to panic anyone, but I think it's just to people say that it's not doing anything. I don't know.
Well, I think it makes so much sense what you said about, if you're going to get pregnant, if you're going to carry a birth to term, you need to be tending to these things anyways, tending to toxins and food sensitivities in your diet, and clean up your environment where you're growing the child, because you're just opening yourself up for more pregnancy complications or problems with the child, transferring your toxins to the child. You've got to really think about detoxification and cleaning up your diet, because it's not about you anymore and your personal habits. You've got to tend to this stuff for your child.
Absolutely. I think it's like your body is whispering to you. And right now, if you're dealing with infertility, it's shouting and going, wait, what's going on? And like rushing over here in a panic. Like, why don't we just take, in the grand scheme of things, to have a healthy pregnancy, a healthy postpartum, and your children, 6 months is really nothing.
Yeah.
To ensure that. And for someone that's trying to keep teenagers, dairy and gluten free, it's a nightmare.
Yeah. Yeah. And I noticed that too, also when, with gluten, whenever I consume that, I started having bladder issues also. I noticed recurrent bladder infections, and I finally just had to kick it all together 100%, no cheating. And my mother has the same thing. Okay. Recurrent bladder infections, should kick gluten, totally gone. And then you mentioned that also. A lot of people have these food sensitivities and really aren't paying attention to that. They just think that something's wrong with them, get an infection, take antibiotics, and it just kills their immune system. And then it's just this domino effect that people have that affects their eventually their ability to conceive.
Yeah, and for me with the bladder side of things, it came to the point where I was allergic to so many different antibiotics. I was peeing blood. I didn't even know what to do anymore. And then I discovered the food thing, and I was like, thank goodness, because I probably would have gone down to some sort of surgery route where they would, who knows what they would have done. But yeah, it's kind of interesting how we, to me, it's you assemble that team, right? And it's not excluding conventional medicine. If you're dealing with infertility, you have your RE, you have your OBGYN, but you have your fertility coach, you have your nutritionist, your masseuse, your chiropractor, your acupuncturist, and really you're in the center. And you're the connector of that healing table, and it's each person plays their role, and you can take each bit of information, but your body best.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because any practitioners, they're not spending enough time with you to really, like say a medical doctor, they're spending 10 or 15 minutes maybe. And, you're not going to get a lot of sound information out of that. So you have to be very, very careful and research everything yourself. You cannot 100% leave your health in the hands of other people. You've got to take responsibility yourself. And that's why we do this show, do this podcast.
That's right.
And so what are some of the, you talked about some of the statistics on IVF failure. And can you talk about some do's and don'ts for in vitro fertilization? Some things that if they do finally decide they need to go that route, then maybe they tried all the natural stuff that's not working. And Are there any do's and don'ts you can talk to us about?
I think so. So maybe you're listening to this and you're like, I just want to go to IVF. I don't want to do any of the other, functional side of things. So if you're just planning to go to IVF, obviously there's a huge expense to that. So you want to look at your, ensure that increase your success. So with that, at a minimum, I would say looking at the mental, emotional side of things. So we run a mindfulness fertility series a couple times a year. So really looking at adding in meditation or journaling, mindfulness, just your daily routine, such as mindful hand washing or mindful walking or mindful showering, like being able to slow down, being able to set boundaries, saying no. So studies from Alice Domar, she's a pioneer of mind-body fertility. She's a Harvard researcher. So I've been doing this for more than 20 years and found that people in a mind-body fertility group, 55% of them went on to become mothers within 6 months, and then 95% became pregnant within 2 years, became a mother somehow within 2 years. So the mindset piece alone is huge, being able to, shifting your perspective. I just did a episode on my podcast talking about triggers during the holiday season. The simple question, just sort of that question that we get asked, oh, do you have kids? Someone just like small talk, well-meaning, sends someone that's dealing with infertility come down a complete like spiral, not knowing what to say, then either spitting it all out or spitting nothing out, and then just like worrying about it. So a huge trigger for that. And then the holiday season, spending time with family and friends. So, and people that have children, it can be really, really painful. So getting support around that, and the fact of the mind body group, really having other women that are going through this journey, so you can shine some compassion on them, which then helps to put it back to yourself, because a lot of times it can feel very isolating, and that you're by yourself. And when I was going through this, they say when I said donor egg, people are like, I don't even know what you're saying. Yeah. So it's, and I didn't have anyone. I had my husband, but I didn't have anyone that really understood. So now, getting a support group is really key as you go through that. So if that is where you're going, IVF, there's visualization exercises you can do. Circle and Bloom has some really good ones for an IUI procedure or an IVF procedure you can listen to, and it takes you through like every step of the procedure, and then you can visualize, your eggs and your womb and your like all of that, and each piece just sort of visualizing it in your body, and that helps to calm you down.
Yeah, and let's also talk about the drugs that are administered with IVF, and can just run through that and what happens, like how you feel when you take those drugs, and the impact, the emotional toll, things like that.
So most people that I'm dealing with are like, I'm seeing them beforehand. So as far as like if they are going through IVF, they're usually like people would have lots of different reactions, right? They could have people that become extra like very stressed around that. If there's ovarian hyperstimulation, which is no joke, you need to, get medical help for that right away. So each person is going to respond to those drugs differently. And depending on what's going on with their health, if they haven't addressed gut infections, food sensitivities, thyroid issues, they may have different reactions to them. So will be very individual. For myself, when I was going through it, I didn't really have any major issues for myself. I was just but I was very, I think, naive when I was going through this. I just thought it was going to work, and it did work. So I think now we can be more informed, and there's women that help people specifically going through IVF, like each step, and are, knowledgeable about the medication and the drugs for IVF. That's not my area of expertise. I'm helping people avoid IVF. So so that would be something. If that's the way you want to go, then you have to do what feels right for you.
Yeah, and people can get very emotional and crying and fighting
absolutely.
with their spouse, and like it's not all rainbows and roses.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and so is there anything else that you want to contribute to this conversation, or a message that you want to give to women that are having trouble conceiving?
Yeah, I think if you're dealing with infertility, to not get like hyper focused on that diagnosis, to see what else is going on in your body, what has been missed. Like if it's low AMH or premature ovarian failure like myself, or premature ovarian insufficiency, unexplained infertility, PCOS, endometriosis, don't get stuck on that diagnosis. Look at the whole body. Is there a food sensitivity? That's, people don't normally like that piece, but consider the food sensitivity, because making some of these foundational changes are a lot less expensive than spending $60K on IVF. So looking at doing the elimination diet with you and your partner, typically we recommend for a minimum of you and your partner going dairy and gluten free for at least 90 days. If you're not pregnant, then dig into testing. So looking at gut testing, looking at hormone testing using the Dutch, looking at hair testing. So dig into that piece and see what's being missed. And then, but if the functional side does not feel right for you, it probably won't work, because you have to do the work. You need to be able to make those diet changes, those lifestyle changes. And if you're kind of like, I just don't feel it, it probably won't work.
Yeah. I mean, to really overcome a serious health challenge, it takes a lot of work and involvement on the patient's part or the client's part. It takes a lot.
Absolutely.
People have to want it really bad. They have to be motivated and want to make these changes. And, some of us really take to that. We love it. We love eating healthy and feeling great as a result of eating healthy, and little detectives trying to figure out our bodies and what's going on and figure out how it works. And it's super fun. But other people just not interested in that, or feel like they don't have the time. And so it's for sure all about personal choice. So Sarah, tell us where we can find you and what kind of, help and programs and things you offer helping women to conceive.
Yeah, so you can find me on the Get Pregnant Naturally podcast. It's on iTunes and Spotify, and we speak with functional people in the functional medicine community, doctors, and natural fertility solutions and mind-body fertility. So definitely check out that podcast. And then also, we have a couples coaching program that we help couples conceive. So making those foundational diet and lifestyle changes using the tools of functional lab testing, and really getting to the root cause of, well, why is it not working?
Well, Sarah, thanks so much for coming on the show. And I love that you're providing these resources for women and couples, because this is a growing issue. And it's one of the reasons that I do what I do. It's just a terrible thing to deal with when you finally got married and you have this dream of having a child and you're ready, and then it's just not happening, and people blame themselves, they get upset, it's really devastating. And toxins play a huge role in interfering in conception. So thank you so much for the work that you're doing.
Thanks for having me, Wendy.
Yeah. So everyone, thanks for tuning into the Myers Detox podcast, where every week we explore topics related to detox and detox supplements and protocols, and how toxins are impacting your health and your life. So thanks for tuning in. I'll talk to you guys next week. You can check me out at myersdetox.com, where we have hundreds of podcasts and hundreds of articles, tons of free resources for you to learn more about how to detox your body. Thanks for tuning in.